there's a conference, and I recommend you watch the whole conference. And this was the 2012 landing briefing, so it's the conference after they've supposedly successfully landed the Curiosity rover on Mars, and one of the main speakers there was this guy Adam Steltzner. So they were being asked questions by the press, and let's just have a look at this little clip of Adam Steltzner, who's one of the lead engineers. I think he supposedly devised the
sky crane, yeah,
the method by which the thing is actually landing.
That's right. He was the guy who sort of pushed for the sky crane system to be used. Yeah.
Right. So let's just take a look at this.
Adam, tell us about the landing.
All right, Greg. I can't tell you too much about it. I mean, it looks good. I'm being a little flip. In short, it looked extremely clean. We touched down in conditions that were on the more benign side of our nominal expectation. By the way, I want to preface everything. This is preliminary data scooped with the sieve in the cacophony of the control room during the celebration, right? And largely by my good friend Miguel San Martin, who's somewhere out there, I hope. At any rate, very nominal, remarkably good. Our navigation error was on the low side of our expectation.
What? I have to ask you, what kind of file type? Can you tell us about the image file type and compression that was used to send this very important couple of thumbnails back from Mars?
Yes, unfortunately, I absolutely cannot. If Justin Mackey is in the room, or there's a couple other people on the team who'd be able to whip that out quickly, but I couldn't tell you. Sorry.
So the guy, he doesn't even know what format the images are in that have been sent back to the Earth.
There's no evidence of any real science going on there, as far as I can see.
I would expect someone who's the lead engineer on that project to know every single minute detail about the file formats, the software, everything. He should, and it appears to me that he knows nothing.
It is very strange when you listen to what he says, and I think the argument would be made that he wasn't responsible for the imaging technology that was used. He was just responsible for the landing mechanism. Even so, I would expect him to have an interest in the imaging technology, because that's what his lander is being used for, to get the images, for heaven's sake. So you would expect him to be interested more enough to be able to answer that question. In fact, that's a theme in that question and answer session, isn't it? There are several questions which to me seem fairly, they should be able to answer them really, and they can't answer them.
No, which I think sheds light on how this cover-up, if it is a cover-up, and if the hypothesis is true, is operating, because I think Steltzner probably believes that thing went to Mars and landed on Mars. So it's a combination, in my opinion, it's a combination of his ego and him actually fooling himself that that's happened. So he's probably been recruited. They've maybe done a personality profile on people who they are recruiting for these lead positions, and maybe people further down the chain perhaps know that the thing isn't landing on Mars, and the vast majority of them on the team are being duped. That's just my opinion, which you'll see why I think that later on in the program.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say that when we spoke about this, and I'm still kind of hedging my bets on this one. I'm not saying that the rovers aren't on Mars.
Andrew's on the fence.
I'm definitely on the fence, and I don't mind saying that in this case. But like you say, when you stack these things up that we're looking at, it really gives you pause for thought. And I think the problem is that you think, well, what's happened to all this engineering effort? They've spent all this money and everything, and we've got these images which are allegedly from Mars, but what really are they? What are we really seeing, and what have they really done? And that's what's hard to believe, that somehow they could have they could have done all of this as a fake. It's hard to believe that
Right.
it could have been a whole fake.
Now
I'm
let's
gonna go on to this.
let's come on to the images. You mentioned
Yes,
the images,
yes.
and let's come on to them. Just to point out, all of these images that I'm going to show you are from NASA's published websites, and I've got the reference numbers for the images, which will be put on the screen, so you can look them up yourself from NASA's website. Now, the first one we're going to look at is a Curiosity rover image, image number PIA 16204. We'll put the whole image on the screen there, and you can see I've got a little red square marked at the left hand side of the screen there, because some of the evidence in these images is quite hard to see when you look at the whole landscape. But let's just zoom in to that little area that I've highlighted there, and what do we see on the screen there between these two rocks?
Well, there appears to be a small rodent in the picture.
Right. Well, in my opinion, that's some kind of rodent, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I'd seen this picture before, actually, before we had this conversation, and it is very strange that you see that image and you think, well, is that just a chance, line of sight effect that we're seeing, or it really does look, as you say, like some type of lemming, or...
See, I originally found it in a video on YouTube, I think by Monty Williams. He thought it was a prairie dog, but if you look closely, it's not a prairie dog. I came to the conclusion that it was most likely a lemming. That's the closest match. And interestingly enough, one of the places where NASA test or claim to test and develop their rovers is in the Canadian Arctic at a place called Devon Island, a 300-mile long deserted Arctic island with a 23-kilometre meteorite crater in the middle of it, and there are indeed collared lemmings. It even looks like the right subspecies of lemming,
Right.
with a tiny mark on its collar.
It's very, very unusual.
Lemmings have tiny little limbs because they live in such a cold environment. They have tiny little limbs. They can kind of curl up in their own fur. And indeed, in the photo, you can't see any limbs.
Now, one of the rovers was tested. It is known that they've done tests on a place called Devon Island.
Yes.
This is
Yes.
the largest unpopulated island in the world, very, very remote. But one of the creatures which is resident on that island and seen regularly is the Arctic lemming. Yeah, and there's we've got a picture of one on the screen there. So, are we looking at, in the Mars image, a picture of a lemming on Devon Island?
Well, this is the question that we need to present ourselves with, don't we? And I mean, Devon Island is northern Canada, isn't it? So it's in that sort of area, so it is very remote.
Let's have a look at this next image. Again, it's well, I'll give the reference 0109 MR 0684022 000E1 NASA image, and just to the right hand side there, if we zoom into that.
Well, again, it wasn't me who initially spotted it. It was somebody on YouTube saying that it looks like a backbone, like a line of vertebrae, some kind of marine species, probably.
Clearly, it's some sort of vertebrae. That's not a random rock formation, in my opinion.
I would agree with that, and I've shown that image myself in one or two of the presentations that I've done. Yes.
Pretty difficult to describe that as a random rock formation.
Yeah, exactly.
How would an image of a vertebrate work itself into the Mars images? Well, again, perhaps it is somewhere like Devon Island where they've tested some of these rovers. A whale that's been beached, or one theory is that we get what are known as walrus graveyards, where hunters will come and kill a load of walruses and they'll take the tusks and all of the stuff that they want, and then they'll just leave the bodies to rot. So you'll get vertebrae lying around the ground, as we see there. And we see here on the screen a picture of a whale skeleton. So we're not biologists, so we haven't really identified what type of creature the vertebrae is from, but certainly pretty conclusive to me that that's some animal that's died, that's been on Earth.
Right, and I mean, this brings us to the point of there are a number of these images, and we're going to come on to some more. So we have two alternatives, really. Either we're looking at images from Mars, and Mars once had creatures, like whales, like walruses, going around in its oceans or seas or whatever. Or we're looking at images from the Earth, which are purported to be from Mars, and either of those two gives us a problem with the official story of what's going on.
If you look at the lemming, it would say it has to have the life's the same as Earth now.
Atmosphere,
How can a lemming exist in the Martian atmosphere with what is it, less than 1%?
Minus 73 degrees centigrade or whatever.
So
there's a few other remarkably bone-like rocks that have turned up in the photographs.
Well, let's turn to that one, because we've got that one next.
The best match I could find was walrus bones.
So Douglas Gibson has actually suggested that this bone on the surface of Mars is actually a walrus arm bone.
But that walrus forearm definitely seems to be the best match.
Right, so you think...
But if anyone knows more about sea mammalian bones, happy to be corrected.
Yeah, we can see the image there of a walrus skeleton. It does look very similar to some sort of arm bone of a sea creature such as a walrus.
It does, and I mean that particular image I'd not seen before I saw it in your document, the one of this. It does look like a bone, a hip bone or a thigh bone or something, or the walrus equivalent of whatever they would call it on a walrus. Yeah, very unusual.
If they are faking it, they would have to do it in extremely remote parts of the world, and interestingly, in some of the remotest Arctic regions, what they call the Arctic desert regions of the world, you can find what they call walrus graveyards, because walruses, the early hunters a couple of hundred years ago, they didn't even have to go out to sea. They could just find a huddle of walruses, because they crawl up on the land and shoot the whole lot of them and just take the tusks.